Okay. Hi, everyone. Let's get into it. I am Jose, co-founder of Velaris. Today, we're going to be chatting about the future of AI-driven customer success and go-to-market strategy. I think a lot of people are talking about AI like it's some sort of magic wand for GTM, but most teams are still sort of duct taping ChatGPT into Google Sheets and call it innovation. So today we've got two great sharp operators. I know ones we have Michael. Michael is a PhD. He's also a GTM and operations leader. He's worked at Microsoft, done the whole McKinsey, moved to fast scaling SaaS companies like Staffbase and a bunch of other AI companies. And we also have Tim, who's also a PhD and who's been head of data science and CTO at various very successful companies before, and now is building AI agents with us here at Velaris. So thank you both for joining us. Quick intros. How did two PhDs end up working in SaaS, in startups? Maybe we'll start with you, Michael.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it's poor life choices. But no, I mean, to be honest, I think it's a great time to be in SaaS. I think both Tim and I are physicists. I think Tim is a theoretical physicist. I was an experimental one. So I guess if you don't make it into theory physics, you can always do commercial roles and go to market roles, and that's kind of where I've focused most of my life.
Awesome. Tim.
Yeah, well, I think technology has always been part of my life ever since I was a kid. I was one of those youngsters who had the first contact with computers, very, very young, way back in the late 70s for me. I always had this love of abstracting things and coding things. I was always in love with, modeling stuff and so on, and that led me to into a number of different sort of abstract sort of domains, theoretical physics being one of them. And I grew to love and have grown to love very much applying all of that technology to the real world. So it was a lot of fun and excitement for me to be in the real world solving real problems. And as Michael said, the sort of state of the technology these days, it's a fantastic time to be alive, to sort of be applying this stuff. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. I think we're all very excited as well to have you working with us. All right, let's kick it off. Michael, maybe with you, we'll start with some GTM stuff. So what parts of the GTM motion do you think are being replaced or being enhanced today with AI? Is it people? Is it emails?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, literally every corner of the motion is probably enhanced in one way or another, right? There's plenty of research out there now where people have looked at AI in sales roles, and what they basically found is if you have top sellers, they still are top sellers. But if you have sellers that are, let's say, have some minor gaps in writing an email and negotiating, etc., and those type of areas, then LLMs can actually, even just LLMs can make a huge difference for these sellers. And somebody who may be sort of a low performer could certainly become a mid performer in sales. I think we see AI obviously in other areas as well. It helps people that are sort of in people-focused roles to get out of the way. So taking your notes, right, following up, next steps, etc. I think for a seller, and I've seen this firsthand, that some of the companies I've worked at, if an AE is really busy, let's say 10 meetings a day, um, then it really helps to have something that keeps track and take the admin load of that person. It increases sales productivity immensely. So I think those are some of the areas.
Anything in CS that we can talk about, Tim, that we're seeing being replaced as well?
Well, I think there are similar points there to the ones that Michael said. That sort of friction and that sort of those time-intensive tasks of all the admin and so on, which a bit like the last mile sort of problem, keeps you away from getting things actually done and connecting back with folks.
Yeah. And we'll touch on like what are the low hanging fruits in CS and post sales, which I think there are plenty of them. But before, Michael, I was thinking, has there been anything, is that like a belief that you held about GTM that's radically changed in the last 12 months?
Yeah, quite a number of actually. I think firstly, it's really quite fitting we're having a conversation about CS. I've seen a lot of sales motions that are shifting actually further back in the process, right? That starts with a pricing model. I think if you look at most of sort of the AI space right now. A lot of AI companies aren't actually priced on a per seat basis. Many of them are priced on a usage basis or on a customer value type basis, which is really, really fascinating. That obviously enhances the role of a customer success team immensely. I think that's really powerful. I think some of the other things we're seeing is that in terms of the RevOps piece and the go-to-market engineering piece, these operational teams, actually the one-person team maybe is a bit much saying a one-person team, but that type of thing is not far out anymore, it seems. Like there's a lot of processes and a lot of things that can now be run through not necessarily AI right away. It can be like a number of automations, and the versatility of integrations nowadays is insane. So I think there's a lot efficiency gains to be held there, which really directly impacts company evaluations. And finally, I think as mentioned earlier, I think some of the core tools that we know today, like CRMs, for example, they're stepping further the background. And so if you're somebody who's working on the front line, you tend to increasingly focus on your customer and spend time with the customer and spend a lot less on the admin side of things and progressing opportunities and sales stages inside your tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think people that are good at talking to people are going to be busier now then?
Certainly.
Like the relationship side of things, right?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's also a bit of it draws a line in the sand maybe in a way, because it opens up a question to a lot of folks out there that are in the go-to-market roles, right? Whether that's a people focusing side or more of a programmatic side. It opens up a question, who are you really, right? Because it becomes more and more important now to be actually have a human aspect in this, to be a people person, to really interact, to really have empathy. Because all the systematic things that used to be important are can now actually increasingly move into sort of automation and operational efficiencies. And so for that reason, we're going to probably see quite a bit of interesting changes in terms of the roles that people look at. And also, I think the roles themselves are kind of like shifting a little bit and sort of the type of task that they do. And there's quite a bit of shuffling around. I'm quite excited seeing sort of where this is going.
Yeah. And I think that, especially in post sales, what we see is that historically you've had, and it depends on the company, right? But you've had like the onboarding team, the CS team, and then the support team. And now what you're looking at is if you really break down sort of the jobs to be done, right? Out of those functions individually and like the individual things, 70-80% of those things could be automated, right? Like think about an onboarding manager, a CSM, what they do, like not like conceptually as the role, but what they actually do on a day-to-day, right? They read emails, they plan for meetings, they get back to people. Onboarding people might be designing and migrating data and sort of. So if 70-80% of that's going to be potentially replaced by agents, right? Or whatever you want to call it, agentic flows, agentic workflows, automations, that remaining 20%, right? Does it justify, the level of specialization to keep that role? Or is it going to be like, what is that? I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that those lines are getting really blurry, right? Does it justify to still have someone doing the onboarding piece on its own for that 20% that's not agentic, someone doing the 20% on the CS and someone doing the 20% on the support? I mean, I'm curious to hear your thought, Tim, because you always say that like our heads and humans are actually much closer to an LLM, right? So what's your take on this sort of, the human side is now more important than ever? Is it actually going to change anything or?
No, I do see that. Yeah, I do think certainly in the short term that will be the case. I think, and being able to maintain that human aspect is clearly very important right now, and it will get more important because that will be something that that humans will have over the machines initially, as it were. But I do think longer term things will change, and I think that I do think that what's customer success about? Ultimately, it's about helping your customers succeed in their business, and so I think these tools will help remove some of the friction and layers that are in the way that often CS folks help move out of the way and so on and manage. So I think they'll be sort of like, I think we'll be exposed. CS people will be exposed more to that particular problem, and so having skills in that area is going to be important. How do you make your customer successful? And of course, having a good human touch is an important thing, but I think making the product that you're selling more and more valuable to your customer is ultimately what it's about, and these tools will help you get closer to that. And that's another one of those sort of, you were talking about those potential barriers which are in different places in different companies and so on. I think they'll shift over time. So I think that's one aspect as well. And you might say, well, CS people are going to get closer to being product people or more strategic, all of those sorts of things. It's really about that. I think that's a really good thing. It will help. And I equally think that it's the other dimension to that is that often we think of, well, it's humans talking to humans, and I think that will be around for a long time. But I do think that on the other side of the table, you'll have humans that are also much better equipped with technology and assistance and amplification from this sort of technology as well. So that aspect will change as well. You'll be sitting across someone who is much better informed, for example, about how your product is and how their sort of like users are using it, those sorts of things. So I think there's sort of more transparency, if you like, and some of those some of those layers will fall away, and it'll get back down more to fundamentals. That might be a sort of naive, sort of optimistic view, but I think that's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that that machine talking to machine ratio is going to improve, like it's going to increase like crazy, right? So what is it exactly that you have to be good at, from the human side? That's also a question. I don't know, is it really relationship building? Like maybe it's something else, right? But one of the things that's always spoken about is how CS teams in general are always late to the party, right? And in terms of adoption of technology and adoption of innovation, and sales and marketing are always like the ones that get all the quick wins. Why do you guys think, Michael, maybe we'll start with you, why do you think that's the case?
Firstly, the revenue side is the marketing side actually, and the sales side always had traditionally really strong tech ecosystem, especially when it comes to detecting leads, detecting signals, buyer intent, lead scoring, etc. I think there's a lot of tools out there that kind of did some of that, and that was there before, in a way, AI, right? And now most of these tools are adding AI, so they're already vertically really, really strong, well-established players that have the use cases down to a T, and now basically adding AI capabilities. And you can see there are some folks in that space that kind of adding AI just as a sort of lipstick on a pig, if you will. Like the underlying tech is still pretty old, but there's like some LLM that will now do a translation
Polishing
from
turd,
English, or exactly. It does a little bit of refinement. But you also have companies that fundamentally change the game, and that kind of obviously gives an opening to like a whole bunch of sales tech companies out there that are fundamentally changing the game in terms of addressing and detecting leads, custom signals, etc. So it's like on the sales side, super exciting, and it's always been a revenue driver. So you can always equate, or you should always have the chance to equate sort of like the tools that you're using, how you're using them, and then the type of conversion rates it leads to, and the type of ultimately revenue it drives. And because you always had that equation there, or at least you should always have that equation there, it's much easier to make a business case investment decision on sort of like the sales side of things, that leads obviously to a lot of adoption of these tools.
Yeah. I think there's also like, I mean, it's just a huge industry on its own, right? Like MarTech, I think there's more, like last time I checked, there's that famous, picture with like the MarTech ecosystem. Last time it was more than 20,000 companies. I don't know what it is now, but it's larger than like multiple vertical software verticals together, like all sorts of types of technologies. And the other thing is that, so you said something interesting there, right? It's always easier to sort of tie to ROI. And I think there's always a correlation with the type of the founders and how CS is perceived, right? Are you a company that perceives CS as like a cost center? Are you do you have founders and leadership that perceive CS as a growth engine, right? And we see everything, from one extreme to the other. And that really correlates with everything in between, right? Like what sort of technologies you use, the investment that you get, and the jobs that you do as well, right? Are you like a glorified support agent, or are you like doing, impacting the bottom line? And the other thing is that post-sales is very complicated, right? I think you can't generalize and say that everyone has a similar sales process, because there's obviously like very different ACVs, very different sales cycles and the very different profiles that need to, that are good at doing different things. But at the end of the day, it is a more transactional sort of cookie cutter approach. I think the sales part of the funnel of the whole life cycle, when you look at post sales, it's like wildly different. I mean, we have customers that have thousands of customers that pay not that much. We have customers that have 50 customers that pay 10 million each, right? So the whole process will be so different from onboarding to everything, renewing, growing, retaining those accounts. That is very hard to just sort of create like a cookie cutter approach to, hey, here's your AI tool for everything, for the PLGs to the super enterprise. And I think that's the beauty as well of this challenge. And, one of the reasons that we're very excited about the future of this industry, right? Because there is a massive opportunity in that space.
No, certainly. I think you're right, especially on sort of like on the sales side, it always involves two parties, right? And maybe sometimes three, we have a partner. So we know the dance we're dancing, and we're going to go into the dance, and we're going to dance the dance, and there's going to be a bunch of competitors, and everybody, is going to just dance around everyone, and etc. It's a bit like, obviously there's an expectation how this process works because you're working across organizations. But when it comes to the post-sale side, customer success side, it's much more product dependent, much more dependent on the type of customer, as you outlined, Jose, right? Much more dependent on the type of customers you have, your motion, etc. That's actually where it becomes really challenging to find a good recipe. And I think that's probably what's going to get interesting, because kind of like the value is kind of shifting there now a little bit more as well.
Yeah, just to sort of jump in there, I totally agree with that. Yeah, you've got post sales, you've got the products on the one hand, which is doing different things for different people. Everyone has their own way of using the product potentially. So you've got the product in there, which is a complex, beautiful thing of value, of course. But people have to use and get value out of it. And then you've got all of the users as well and their different usage patterns. So I think there are these extra dimensions, I would say, and that does make it more challenging, makes it very interesting. It's a very rich sort of environment to think about building products and helping sort of post sales processes in that domain. I do think also that one of the things that is going to happen with the rise of AI is products. We are going to go through a bit of a sort of like change to all of the products. Everyone that's using a product is going to sort of have to evolve their product to a certain extent. There's a lot of pressure on everyone. Everyone is calling. There's the hype curve, of course, but everyone is saying, "Hey, we want an AI product. We want to use this stuff. We want to get value out of it." So I think everyone who's working to help people succeed with products are going to have to sort of like deal with this. Things are going to change as well. So that's even more. I guess that introduces challenges in the sales side as well. But it's one thing that's everywhere, perhaps, that affects everyone. But the products will be changing themselves, and getting people to be able to users to be able to get the value they want out of them is going to be something to deal with.
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's very interesting that we're seeing in CS is, and I guess it's a challenge, right? Like everyone wants to incorporate AI workflows, but how do we go beyond individual CSMs using ChatGPT, right? It's almost like people are looking for things outside some of the products that they're using, right? And that's an opportunity because there's a lot of interesting things happening, but it's also a challenge on its own. Maybe Tim, how do we think about this? How do we try and avoid CSMs that are looking for solutions out there, beyond the CSM doing some searches and some exports and running it through ChatGPT on their own, and actually embedding them in an organization, in a like across a whole team?
Yeah, I can certainly see the value of using ChatGPT and other tools. I'm a big user of those things. I get a lot of value out of those things. I think they are amazing, and I think everyone should be able to take advantage of those things. I think it's horses for courses. That can help you in certain types of situations using a product like that. If you're doing a research piece, or you've got a particular question about something you're fathoming that's in your own mind, that it's about process, those sorts of things. If you go and ask ChatGPT about a specific customer of yours, it's not going to know about that because it doesn't have the context. Of course, that's one of the things that's changing, and it's all about getting this sort of technology connected more with the data and the context. That's one of the challenges. So I think that's what one aspect of it is, having the context, and that's what building a product around these things can do. It can make sure that the context is flowing in the right way. And I also think that that particular sort of that particular scenario where you reach out and you ask a question is really useful, but it's not the only sort of like mode in which AI can be very helpful. So it can also ride along and be sort of humming away in the background, as it were, as a sort of trusted sort of advisor and an ally, as it were, to keep track of what's going on, tell you about stuff you've missed, remind you to do things, those sorts of things. Share patterns with you that are emerging that you might not have noticed. You're very busy doing something else. So I think that mode of having an AI always working in the background, sort of like more strategically, as it were, like that, rather than responding to questions that might come to mind. And so working in that way and with all of the context it needs, I think that's really exciting. And it's not that's I think one way of developing a product around this sort of technology, bringing the context to it and bringing that sort of strategic sort of approach to it.
I love something that you always say here at Velaris. It's like the ambience AI, right? It's like it's just there, and it's like you might not see it, right? But it's there. I think this reminded me. I mean, we had a really quick kind of 3-minute catch up just before this call with Michael, and you were saying about your take on the future of UX and products, and will there be products? Will there not be products? I know that's a bit of a whole different topic that I don't necessarily want to open the whole can, but interested to hear how you feel if that's going to be any different in sales and post-sales.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting ongoing conversation, right? I think we had sort of some companies out there, like Klarna, for example, announcing that some of the major core SaaS tools will get replaced with sort of AI-based, maybe in-house built tools. We see quite a number of companies actually. That number of companies use tools like CRMs, but kind of then realize, actually, given sort of some of the sales process and given that the customer base is maybe a bit more on the SMB side of things and also very large, maybe a CRM is not always necessarily that needed. It could be a combination of a data structure such as Airtable plus a few other things together. And that can also kind of help you navigate your sales environment. I think traditionally what happened, I think maybe early 2000s, was that there was a whole number of new amazing tools that came to market. And these tools actually shaped the entire SaaS industry, Salesforce to name a few, right?
Yeah.
And these tools also shaped roles in the SaaS industry. I think I'm not exactly sure, I don't want to overreach, but I think the customer success role could actually come from that time because you had products that are consumption based, etc.
Yeah.
And so the workflow would follow the tech, right? And so there's a new tech, that's the best practice of how to do it. Your workflow would probably follow that tech. I think now we're kind of seeing a way where we have this opportunity now to do the opposite, right? We can now have the tech follow the workflow. And it's kind of like in the architecture, I have a similar discussion between form follows function, right? So it's a bit similar. Now, it's a much more of a design question now. It's much more of a taste question. And on the UX side of things, it's much more question. You now have the opportunity of showing information that is more essential and not showing other information. And so you can kind of help people focus on the day-to-day and reduce sort of like the daily cognitive load. I mean, just like an example from sales to close off on that point is previously when I was a consultant, we spent time actually looking at the time that sellers use in a day. So in a large enterprise project, you can then kind of like look and do a lot of like surveys and queries, and then kind of there was like this bar chart that came out of it. And there was kind of like, this is the time spent on selling, and then this is the time spent on admin, and then this is the time spent on sort of vacation requests, so other things, expenses, etc., right? Because there's a lot of travel and expenses. So you can look at the bar, and then obviously the time what actually spent on selling was kind of like the blue bar, and then everything was kind of like the gray bar. And that ratio, we very often saw it being like sort of a 50-50, 60-40 ratio, which obviously shows like how much salespeople are actually spending time on non-selling tasks, right? And now you have an opportunity, even if it's just the daily 5 minutes, like if you can save every day just a few minutes, 5 minutes, if you add that up over like a year, that saves like a tremendous amount of time. sort of like improve 1% every day type attitude. You can bring that plus the taste plus the design thinking to these workflows now and kind of like see where it takes us. So it's going to be like super exciting.
Yeah, completely agree. What are the things that, if you were running a CSO, where would you apply AI first, or where do you think the low-hanging fruit is?
Yeah, I'll do my best, and then I think Tim, you can correct me where I'm wrong. But I think one area is probably firstly the data quality and the integrations, right? I think maybe traditionally companies, especially very large ones, would always focus on kind of being the center of gravity, and then everybody like hovers around them and builds into these sort of tools. Versus now you actually have more of an ecosystem, much wider ecosystem, lots of integrations. You see like some really successful, fast-growing AI companies out there. Partly the reason why they grow is the integration. And what that allows is you get a lot more signals, right, from your customer base. I think that's probably one. I think the other one is depending what your sales motion is, right? Sometimes on the sort of more digital product-led sales motions, you can actually do a lot more work now because before you couldn't possibly read and interact with like that number of like tens of thousands of customers and go through all that sort of language. Nobody's got the time for that, but obviously you can use LLMs to do that now, to do a lot of scoring, to give you like a lot of understanding as well about the customer base. So I think those are maybe two areas where I can see that really be successful in the CS space.
Yeah. Tim, anything on your end to add there?
No, well, I think I think you've nailed it there. I think, but I do think also there is, I mean, we touched on it before, just in terms of the low hanging fruit. If I've understood the question directly, I do think that some of that, that heavy, so that all of that friction and that admin sort of work that people do, it was in your pie chart, Michael, about all of the time that's sort of like wasted, as it were, and just sort of turned into heat rather than light as you're filling out your expenses and replying to summarizing meetings and clicking on buttons in a task management system. All of that sort of stuff can go away and sort of like sink into the background and be managed. I think that those are the sort of like the first places. I think in terms of low hanging fruit, where would you potentially start? But I think, all of those. I mean, I think, that's one thing, moving away things to the technology that are just, not really. You don't really need a human for now with this technology at all. And then there's also the next step is gaining a deeper understanding of what's going on. Like you said, I mean, there's all of this data around, and it needs to be understood. I think it has been in the past very challenging to imagine, machines helping you with that, but it's pretty clear they can do that now. I think that's really graphically illustrated by what we've seen. So I think that's the next step. Is like that. Just absorbing all of that, flood of data and pulling out the signals which are there. I'm sure there's so many signals which are there which sort of get lost and are sort of hidden and buried. And I think the technology can unearth some of those and make them clearer. And that means that as well as just having time back, you can be more impactful, and you can pick up on things that are going wrong and nudge them in the right direction. You've got to, or if there's a product issue, you pick up on it earlier and fix it. Those sorts of things. So I think that's the other place, which is all about intelligence and understanding what's going on. And I think the next stage after that is doing more, is sort of like also taking decisions, actually, that's the next step, or nudging people in the right direction, giving advice about, hey, this worked last time, how about doing it this way, next time, those sorts of things. So I think there's the whole spectrum of different things to do there. And starting with that admin stuff and going through the understanding and then action. I think those are the sorts of that's the sort of spectrum as I see it. And I do think that's where we are right now. But I think things are going to transition and change quite a lot, and it is an ever-changing sort of world. And I think it will be interesting to see if we look back. I mean, look back in a few years, how we were sort of talking about this may seem somewhat narrow-minded. I don't know. So I do think there will be a lot of change. I like what you said there, Michael, about the ecosystem. So I do think that's a really interesting thing. All of these, the way the ecosystem works now with these large sort of like big centers of gravity, the smaller sort of satellites orbit around and so on, and have to feel the force of. I do think that could change. I think it will be very disruptive, having technology like these sorts of agents that can connect to these things quickly and pull back what you need, all of that sort of stuff. I think that data exchange and the way that works can evolve quite quickly, and I'm really interested to see and excited to see how that changes. So yeah, I think those are just some other sort of thoughts about how, when you mentioned the ecosystem and all of these different boundaries, I think those boundaries are shifting. So we have to stay very, very alert. And it's as I said, it's a fun time to be alive, to try to figure out and sort of anticipate some of those trends and changes.
When you think about the ROI of AI in CS, right? So I think in the high touch models, right? Again, for the ones out there that are not so familiar, that less customers with bigger contracts, right? I think summarizing calls, improving that coach element that we was talking about, right? How can you help the CSM individually be better at doing their job? That's very valuable. But I think the transformational stuff, maybe in the short term, right, is the pooled CS, right? Whether you want to call it tech touch, pooled CS, low touch, basically the accounts that no one wants to own, right? I think that's where agents can take over pretty quickly, right? And just manage a big pool of customers that no one was owning anyway, right? And I think we're very, very close to seeing some really exciting things on that side. One of the other things I did want to ask you guys was about the role of CS. And, I think every other day I hear someone on LinkedIn or some news or something about this concept of two founders managing like an army of agents, right? And I think that this applies to any other role in the company at some level, right? Whether it's sales or post-sales. I'm curious, particularly in CS, is there going to be like sort of an AI manager? Is this like the evolution of RevOps? Everyone's talking about the architect. There's a few metaphors with like the orchestra directors and like a small group of people managing like a large group of agents. How do you guys feel that's going to evolve? Is that going to be like a very set role that's going to be very quickly just appearing, or?
I don't know, Tim, if you want to start or.
Well, I think, I have some thoughts on that. I do think, like you said earlier, Michael, about this idea that you can design. The tools often get in the way, and you really want, and it's the tail wagging the dog, as it were, rather than the other way around, and users getting value out of the product. So I do think that with this sort of technology, there will be more. Anyone using this sort of technology will want to sort of have an influence on how it works, right? So whether that's building things from scratch or, at what level you work there, but sort of like structuring and architecting what the process is perhaps for the team to use AI, and I think that will be true of CS teams as much as any other team. So I think there will be that sort of role for folks to come in and say, hey, I can help architect this sort of approach or pull ideas together, and we can implement this, as it were. So I do think there is room for that, and that will happen. Not everyone wants to do that. Some folks will just like to continue to be part of the human sort of touch point, the human connection with customers. Others will want to help design how the process works and how we can sort of like benefit from the AI. So I do think there's that aspect to it. But over to you, Michael, because you probably have some other thoughts also.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I feel like it's gonna be a bit of a pendulum, right? The things might shift into full on digital, and then at some point customers might be like, hey, I actually want to speak to somebody, and then it moves fully human, right? And I think what's the function here, the step function that would determine that, I think it's probably the switching costs, right? So if you have, and that increasingly is the case, especially in tech, but maybe other business different, but in tech, switching costs are kind of like reducing. So for a customer to move on and go somewhere else, it's not always that hard. Sometimes it is obviously very hard, but it's not always that hard. I think the second thing is the value of a customer. So I think it's a well-known thing, but an existing customer and revenue from an existing customer can be worth like 5x of the revenue of a new customer, just because it's much easier to expand an existing customer than, in theory, than a new customer. So actually, it's really important to delight existing customers and to really do our best to kind of improve the customer experience. And I think what that means then in terms of sort of AI and automation is that maybe there will be a lot more automation, but you might also be able to reach a lot more customers on a human level at scale than before, because you might have some sort of triaging or some sort of scoring that will get you to the right customer, that will basically allocate your time where it really most matters and where you have like this critical moments of truth where customers are really, really need resolution. Those ones you might actually detect a lot quicker. And then you might actually have a human speaking to these customers. And then on the other side, you have all that, you still can have all the programmatic and the digital sort of stuff that kind of drives the overall engagement and adoption. But this one is going to be one area where we're going to see a lot of noise because you only need to sign up to like any tool right now. You're going to probably receive an email every 2 or 3 days, at the very least every week, about how to get more out of that tool, right? And if you have a stack of X tools, that's just going to add up quite a lot. So let's see. It's going to be super, super exciting space to watch.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think just slightly different sort of angle on that. I think, yeah, I totally, I totally get that. I think another dimension will be that users will. I think products will become. There will be help alongside you as you're using a product, right? So I think AI is going to help that. It's going to help you on board more quickly. You don't necessarily want to jump on a call with someone, but you want help nonetheless. And you've got something like a chat bot or whatever, or something helping you use the products. And I think that will help, and that will create a lot of data, right, as well. So I think so it's a bit like doing user research. That there will be sort of like continuous sort of and deep and sort of sophisticated user research going on all the time, as it were, as users are using. I mean, there are tools that do this to a certain extent already, but as users are onboarding and banging into issues and so on, and all of that stuff can be very valuable feedback if processed in the right way and extracted and digested in the right way to product improvement. So I think that's something which can help also just like feed into product, as it were, not necessarily into humans, like then helping the users. But I think both of those things will happen. But I think there's a couple of different things going on there.
I think that just to close off this one, it made me think about when Michael was saying the allocation of work, right? And I think there's a lot of CSMs, hopefully, that will listen to this. If you're playing with AI, or if you're not, maybe the question, if you're not playing with AI, it's very likely that allocation of work or that your work will be managed by a very kind of proactive colleague that has been playing a lot with AI. So that is kind of the case. I see that. I don't know if it's going to be a de facto sort of role that people will transition to, if it's not going to be a new role, but it does seem like the future is going to be hybrid, right? And I think there's no harm on, I mean, we interviewed a bunch of people recently and some people are still a little bit skeptical, right, around the AI topic. And I think that that's something that is, for me, very, very obvious, right? There's a lot of very proactive people out there just playing around with it, whether it's just like, playing around with ChatGPT and exporting a couple of things here and there. Otherwise, it's kind of like, there was a quote, the survivors are I can't remember what it was, right? The obsessive ones or something like that, right? And I think that's kind of the case here. But guys, just to start sort of wrapping it up a little bit, I wanted to just finish up with a few kind of quick questions. How does the future of GTM and CS look like?
Yeah, probably gonna be wrong on this one, but let's see how it goes. I think maybe one thing on my mind is just thinking about the immense number of AI startups we have today. And in my head, we have like AI native players focusing on one particular point in sort of the value chain, sales process, etc. Then there's established traditional players who add AI, and it kind of, and maybe there's like something in between, but it kind of like focuses a little bit on who's actually going to win this in the long term.
Yeah.
And a lot of AI work itself often is built on a number of foundational models. And so the foundational models, these platforms, they're really, really powerful and really helpful to have. But then on the application layer, how you run your application and whether you build it in-house, whether you do something else, whether you buy it off the shelf, that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think the value here is really going to be deep functional or vertical expertise and sort of the distribution really being, that's why these customers are more valuable than ever, and customer success teams, I feel like, are more valuable than ever. I think the other point is in terms of AI adoption. Right now, I mean, it's a super exciting area, but often still we have the same challenges that we used to have maybe 10 years ago when data science was a big topic, right? And that challenge is siloing and the data infrastructure and all kinds of disconnections. And actually, if you can't get the data together and have a really good, high quality, very relevant data, there, it's really difficult to actually train AI on it. And so on the enterprise side, it's a big uphill battle to fix data silos, and it's also a big uphill battle to go through like all the different compliance motions. And I feel like that's going to be probably an interesting thing that might dampen actually AI adoption. And there's numbers out there, but on the enterprise level, I think probably only about 20% of AI projects are successful today. Could be wrong, but that's kind of like hear all kinds of numbers on this one. Versus on sort of like the SMB startup mid-market side of things, much faster adopters, because obviously the complexity of the data and the underlying infrastructure is much less challenging to deal with. So let's see how that goes. But at the end of the day, I'm super hopeful. So it will be very impactful. The question is how much time it will take.
So Tim, give us your sort of bold prediction for AI in general in 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is a tricky one. Like Michael said, in 5 years, it's things are moving so fast. It is
2 years.
Really...
2 is the new 5 years, right? 2 years is maybe in 2 years then.
Yeah. But I think it's really interesting. It is really interesting and a difficult one to sort of like to fathom, isn't it? But following up on what Michael said there about startups and access to foundational models, these foundational models are pretty amazing, right? And having these are going to power a lot of these are the fuel, as it were, the logs on the fire, which are going to make things work, I think, here. And yeah, like you say, if you get if you've got privileged access to foundation models, that might be useful. I think that already the models are pretty amazing, and you can build a lot of stuff with the models we already have. And I do think that one thing that is not it's not only startups that have this, but it's not sort of trapped inside bigger enterprise companies. It's like creativity and being able to reimagine, to imagine what the future and something new. So I think there's a lot of hope for folks out there to sort of embrace this and build new things. And I still think that that means that the game is open for lots of different players to succeed and make it really, make an impact using this sort of technology, standing on top of standing on the shoulders of the giants that are building these foundational models, which are amazing. It's like open source. They're there, and that's pretty cool. So I do think so. It's not really my view is a positive one, that there will be a bit of the real renaissance in. There'll be new types of products. There'll be new ways of interacting with technology, all of those sorts of things. I think it'll be a fab time to be alive, building products and getting value out of them. And I think in customer success too, it'll be really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of, you going to helping the market go through those sorts of movements and transitions and so on. I think could be a really exciting time to be in that field. I do think that all the tools will help folks in that business a lot, and it will probably what you're doing is going to change, and you will be sort of like being more strategic or being more product focused or whatever it is, more success focused rather than just dealing with day-to-day stuff. I don't know, of keeping the customer happy. I don't want to don't want to put the wrong sort of like a gloss on it, but I do think that becoming more strategic will be enabled by this sort of technology, and it will be a fab place to be doing all of this stuff in, because there's going to be a lot of new products around.
Well, I'm very glad you're both optimistic towards it. Cool. I think we're going to wrap it up here. I think just like the message is that if you're in GTM or post sales and you're still scared of AI, you might get replaced. And that means not necessarily by an agent, but by someone that is using an agent. I think that's it for today. Thank you very much, guys. Michael, Tim, really thank you for coming here. And stay tuned for more and see you soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.